I'm Helena Norberg-Hodge from Local Futures. The whole point of this film is to provide a positive, solution-oriented message. But we feel it's extremely important to better understand that we need to understand this system that has been, in an oppressive way, thwarting what humanity clearly wants and needs. We are encouraging that we look at this systemic process, both from the point of view of what we can do right now in the communities where we live, even in the big cities. There are many initiatives that are taking us on a journey towards this systemic transition. We're also insisting, urging, let's say, that you please devote time to a bigger picture call for systemic policy change. Sometimes this gets overlooked. It's what we call big picture activism. It's about recognizing that if all of that activism of people who are desperately trying to do something about the climate issue, about poverty, about the epidemic of depression and anxiety, about the stress, the illness in our society, the pandemics, the loss of spiritually meaningful ways of being in this world, the speed, the stress, people concerned about democracy, a whole range of issues that actually all relate back to this techno-economic system. How we shift our technologies, and including money, which is also a technology, to support life, diversity. Small is beautiful, and small is more productive. Slow is necessary. It takes time to love. It takes time to know. It takes time to actually know that what you're doing is not harming, perhaps even helping others, helping the rest of creation. So please think both in terms of what you can do at the local level, but also help to build up as rapidly as possible a demand for systemic change. So now I want to ask Damon to tell us a bit about why he thinks localization is important and why he spent precious time helping with this little film. We had quite a journey trying to tighten up this script when we're covering so much territory, and I think we did really well in terms of, it took some arguments and some sort of blood, sweat and tears, but we're still great friends. So I'm very grateful to you, Damon, and look forward to hearing from you. And I'm sorry, I need to add again, for those of you who might not have heard earlier, that Damon is the producer of that very well-known film, That Sugar Film, and more recently of 2040. Both of these films have been hugely successful. I think the best, what is it, the most profitable Australian documentaries ever, or with the widest reach. And yeah, we're very honored to be working with Damon.
Thanks, Helena, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Bundjalung Nation, the Arakwal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and think that what that culture has to offer in this moment couldn't be more relevant and pertinent to what we're talking about tonight. Decentralized groups of empowered people working together under natural law to operate and function is exactly what localization is in many ways. And why I was drawn to it is, I think COVID has particularly shown to me how fragile our system is and how ill-equipped it is for the perils of the 21st century, that it was largely built for a different time and with different things to face, and it was very centralized, and we now have such a complex system, and we have a future of climate shocks and more pandemics, that we need to pivot what we've been doing. And we all know, we all feel it, that it isn't working. And it's good, I think, for people to finally see that these problems we face, whether it's a meaning crisis or a climate crisis or a biodiversity crisis or a polarizing social media crisis, they're all connected and they're all being driven by similar cogs of this engine that is no longer serving us as a society and is certainly not serving the biosphere. So we sort of face a decision, we face a crossroad. We are in the process of self-terminating in the way that we're operating. And I think now is the time for us to have these very meaningful conversations that some people would have considered radical even a couple of years ago, but I've been privy to the conversation we're having tonight in places that you'd be very surprised to learn they're happening, that people know that something needs to change. They don't quite know what to do. And this system has so much inertia in it that it's very complicated for a lot of people to unravel from it. But I look forward tonight to, I guess, exploring some of the ideas and the solutions and not spending too much time on what's wrong, because I think we know that and we need to articulate it so that we can understand what needs to be solved. But I think there's an extraordinary amount of work being done right now in areas of democracy, in areas of social media, in areas of food, energy, local energy, equity crowdfunding models that really are the seeds of this better future that I think many of us want. That some of the best minds in the world are now starting to think about what a next system looks like or how we might transition to a next system. And I'm particularly excited about talking to that tonight and sharing some of those initiatives.
Thank you, Damon.
There you go.
Sure you don't want to have another couple of minutes of comments?
For me?
Yeah.
No, I think, localization is not about top-down centralized hierarchy. It's much more distributed. So the sooner that we can get off our high horses and open to questions, I think the better.
All right. Well, Ella, we look forward to hearing from Ella, who is a leader here from the Bunjalung country, who's been doing remarkable, important work, bringing diverse communities together, as she says in the film, to fight for a better system rather than fighting each other. And her work has been about that reawakening to reconnection, the vital importance of reconnecting to others, to the land, and to ourselves. And as she will tell us too, this is what her indigenous culture was all about. So she's a vital link between that, the ancient, bringing it into the future. And thank you so much, Ella, for your contribution to the film, which was also invaluable.
Bogoba, Helena, thank you. I'd just like to also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and just acknowledge the work, care and culture of Indigenous people around the world, and extend my respects to all Indigenous activists and non-Indigenous activists that have been standing and fighting for community, water and our land since time immemorial, and that this work is on their shoulders, and I feel very grateful to be doing the work passed down by my ancestors right now, which is to really be spreading this message of how we can become a more connected global community rather than an economic global community. A lot of my work is embedded in decolonization, and when I met Helena and we spoke about the localization movement, so much of it feels like decolonizing to me. It is exactly what Indigenous ways of being is like. And, a lot of the work has been influenced from her time living in Indigenous communities. So across the world, there is a commonality that Indigenous people have, and that is placing community and the land as our most sacred and precious resources. Unfortunately, in the very small amount of time in which this country has been invaded and taken over with another system, that system seems to be polarized to what my ancestors had on this country. And our law system still exists. It's just not currently the mainstream culture or the main law system that's operating here. I believe in local because I'm an embodied experience of it. I grew up in Sydney, and at the age of 5 had the absolute privilege of returning home to my tribal lands, just in West Bunjalung Nation, which is outside of Grafton, with my older brother and my mother. And we lived off-grid before off-grid was trendy. We swam in the creeks because that was our bath. We had no electricity. Wi-Fi had not yet been invented to my knowledge as a 5-year-old. And I got to grow up learning language and learning at least an idea of what my culture may have resembled pre-colonization. Of course, being from New South Wales, we have been severely impacted by colonization. A lot of our stories have been stolen, but I know that that time living in that community, I felt fuller and more in love with life than I ever did back in the city when we returned back there. And I think it's been part of my work and my mission to bring people back to that life, that absolute magic that we get when we are with country. And by with, I mean we are in deep relation to. So for me, the localization movement is about awakening people not only to the climate crisis that we're facing, but also to the spiritual crisis that we are facing, that every single one of us has a purpose here on earth, and that purpose is to find our way back to connection. And I just like to reiterate what Helena said. We're not an overpopulated population. We are an overpopulated, disconnected population of human beings. And I fundamentally believe that if each and every one of us found our way to tap back into source, we could live harmoniously on this world, on this planet, and our culture and our lives would look a whole lot different.
Thank you, Ella. Now I have the great pleasure to introduce Satish Kumar, a friend and colleague for 43 years. 43 years. And Satish has been a spiritual leader, one of those rare spiritual leaders who has been linking spirituality to life, to the practical realities of life. He started schools, he started Schumacher College, he started a very important magazine called Resurgence. And Schumacher College, which I've been involved with from the very beginning, even from before it was born, in discussions with Satish, is named after this economist who wrote the book Small is Beautiful. So Satish has been one of those rare voices of wisdom, talking about scale, about human scale, about holistic knowledge, about linking mind, heart, and hands for now 50 years it must be. I've known you for 43, but you've been conveying this message, I think, for about 50 years. So we're very honored to have you here tonight and to have you talk about this fundamental link between spirituality and localization. Thank you, Satish.
Thank you, Helena. It is my pleasure and my honor to have been your friend for 43 years. And we have been making this journey together, a pilgrimage towards localization. And so thank you for your wonderful introduction. And E.F. Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful, also wrote an essay in that book called Buddhist Economics. And so local economy is Buddhist economics. Local economy is spiritual economy. Local economy is economy of community, where you value living in a community. Local economy is the economy of the place, where you value and honor and celebrate and cherish where you stand, your place, economy of place. And local economy is neighborhood economy. In Christian tradition, Jesus Christ in the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. But in the global economy, we have destroyed neighborhoods. If you have no neighbor, if you don't know your neighbor, how can you love them? And nowadays we live in global economy where neighborhood and knowing your neighbor is no more necessary. You just buy everything online or in a big supermarket or a department store. You don't know your shopkeeper, you don't know your salesperson, you don't know your producer, you don't know your craftsperson, you don't know anybody. How are you going to love them? So local economy is economy of love. It's a love economy. My good friend, who was also a friend of E.F. Schumacher, and I'm sure you know her, Hazel Henderson, she also talks about love economy. And love economy is economics of the place, economics of community, economics of neighborhood, local economy. So you, in your film and in your 2-3 talks, you have spoken about the economic cost of globalization, social cost of globalization. I want to add to that spiritual cost of globalization. It's very expensive because global economy destroys community, neighborhood, families. We become isolated, disconnected, robots. We become robots in big factory system. So if we want to have spiritual well-being, good mental health, good spiritual health, good psychological health, then we need to value what we make, what we produce with love, with craftsmanship, with creativity, with imagination. So work, the value of good work has been destroyed. When you build a beautiful house with your hands and with your neighbors, and they come together and build a beautiful house, then they have contributed to the life of the community. And you know them, you eat together, you lunch together, you drink tea together. That's a kind of building house, where the modern housing, you don't know who is building it, who is designing it, machines and cranes and everything comes. And there's no human touch, and there's no human contact, a human relationship. So everything, the handicraft and the art had been destroyed by the globalization. So if you want to bring humanity to economy and not become yourself a human being into a cog in a machine and as a resource for the economy, what has gone wrong with global economy is that global economy has changed human beings into a resource for profit, for production, for consumption, for economic growth. Human resources. Every organization has a department called human resources. So humans have become a resource for making money. Now, the local economy and localization changes that. And rather than human beings being a means to an end of profit and money and economic growth, an instrument, a means, an instrument of economic growth, economy and local economy becomes a means for the well-being of the human beings. So human beings become the end and the economy becomes the means. And that's a complete transformation. At the moment, economy is the end and human beings are the means to make the economy, economic growth. So that change is a spiritual change. Also, nature has become a resource for the economy. We value nature only how useful it is for economic growth, for profit, for globalization. That is, again, a big problem, and that is what is creating climate change and biodiversity diminishing, and the oceans polluted, the soil polluted, the rivers polluted. So nature has become also a resource for the economy. In global economy, that is the case. When we transform that into local economy, neighborhood economy, economy of place, economy of love, economy of spirit, economy of community, then nature is no longer only a resource for the economy. Nature's well-being and integrity of nature becomes the end, and the economy becomes the means to that end. So local economy is an imperative for a spiritual well-being, for our mental well-being, psychological well-being, and transforming nature from means to end, and transforming humans from being a means to the end. So natural integrity, integrity of our planet Earth, integrity of human life, they become cherished, they become celebrated. We celebrate the human life and natural beauty, natural abundance, natural gift, and our relationship with nature is not only the utilitarian relationship, it's a spiritual relationship. So in order to have a spiritual renaissance and a spiritual revolution, we need to have a local economy. Global economy is a materialistic economy. Global economy is destroying our spirituality, destroying our traditions, indigenous wisdom, cultures, arts, craft, imagination, all these values which make us human are destroyed. And therefore, my contribution to this great movement of local economy is that local economy is a spiritual imperative. If you want to be happy, if you want to be joyful, if you want to be celebratory, you want to have a good family, you want to have a good neighborhood, you want to have a good community, and live a good, creative, imaginative, satisfying, fulfilling life, go local. Globalization will destroy all the good qualities of life. It will only have a lot of material things. And the quantities, globalization is good with quantities, but total failure in quality. So in order to move from this quantitative lifestyle to a more quality of life, we have to go local, and that is a spiritual imperative. That is my brief and a succinct contribution to this localization and local economy movement. Thank you, Helena. You are doing a wonderful job. You are a great champion of this spiritual love economy, which is a local economy. And I congratulate you and your colleagues for doing this great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish, and thank you for having been a master of this for such a long time. And I think, if you wouldn't mind, maybe if you could say a few words about how Gandhi was a localist, and how Gandhi used to talk about, we don't want mass production for the people. We want production, by the people, not this, So can you say a little bit about Gandhi and his localism?
Absolutely. Actually, E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, he learned a lot from Gandhi. Gandhi was his mentor, and he was a very Gandhian economist, Schumacher. So Gandhi created a word for swadeshi. Swa means self, or local, or place where you live, where you stand, and also deshi means community. So the swadeshi economy, Gandhi said that first of all, we have to value our material things that we are going to transform into clothes and shoes and furniture and houses. And when we have a mass production, then there's a tremendous amount of waste and tremendous amount of pollution, and you destroy the local community. And therefore, in order to use everything frugally, Mahatma Gandhi said, there's enough in the world for everybody's need, but not enough for anybody's greed. And the globalization and the global economy is a greed economy. A local economy is a need-based economy. So produce for the need, not for the greed. If you go for the greed, there's not enough even for 100,000 people. Somebody talked about overpopulation. Even if we had only 1 billion people instead of 8 billion people, and everybody was consuming the way Americans and Europeans and Australians consume, private jets and many cars and many houses and yachts and all that kind of consumerism, even 1 billion people will be too many. And so Mahatma Gandhi's idea was that we need to create economy which is need-based and not greed-based. There's enough in the world for everybody's need, but not enough for anybody's greed. So need-based economy is, what do you need? How much do you need? I have written a book called Elegant Simplicity. That's a Gandhian economic idea. Live simply. How many clothes do you need? How many shoes do you need? How many houses do you need? How many cars do you need? How many phones and computers do you need? If there's endless consumption, that is not Gandhi. That is not, you don't have time for meditation, time for study, time for music, time for poetry, time for walking in nature, time for friendship and family. If you are busy, producing more. And so Mahatma Gandhi's idea was to value your work, cherish your work, celebrate your work, and do what is you really need, and make something beautiful rather than ugly. The economy of globalization is ugly economy. And Mahatma Gandhi wanted a beautiful economy. And the beauty cannot come by this mass production. Beauty can come only by production by the masses, where everybody is involved in growing food or building houses or making furniture or painting a picture, writing poetry, music, dance, family, friendship. Those were the values of Mahatma Gandhi.
Thank you so much, Satish. I think now we can open it up to questions and comments from the participants. And Henry will help us to select some of those questions.
Hey, so for those of you who have questions, it would be very helpful for you, from me, if you would put them in the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom of your screen. If you put them in the chat, I'll also try to get to them. But to begin with the Q&A box, Nicole has asked about movement building, which is a question that came up earlier as well. Change in political systems seems essential to get genuine democracy working. What do you think about this approach? I believe in it, but feel exhausted at the prospect of mobilizing and unifying community. How do we get momentum and participation?
Well, I'll say from Local Futures, we encourage people to take a first step by connecting to a few like-minded people. So we're urging people to change the framing from what can I do to what can we do. And we provide materials that are encouraging a deeper, broader discussion of how can we heal ourselves and the planet. And we're again saying that this systemic direction towards decentralizing, community building, localizing, has this enormous healing potential. So we also urge people as a next step after the sort of connection to look at what they might do at the local level, wherever they live, even in the big city, to start practically implementing some of these strategies that have a systemic benefit. So it's no longer just about focusing on climate, but looking at what can we do that will have this multiplier effect. We are coming out with a community action guide at the beginning of October, so I hope people will come to us to look at that, making concrete suggestions. Now, when we start doing that at the local level, we're also beginning to create a momentum for a type of movement that in many cases is leading to a transformation of local politics. So we can see now the rising of political movement building towards localization, reaching local government. In some cases, large cities where mayors are responding in a really meaningful way. However, we are also encouraging that we keep in mind that there's this huge potential, not of getting totally paralyzed by the idea that to build a movement for transformative change at the global level, that we would have to try to change these people who seem to be locked to their televisions or only looking at the mainstream narrative, not looking beyond that. We can feel very disempowered when we think that way. But what really keeps me going is the knowledge that people, in my experience, are so ready for fundamental change. They are so aware that this system isn't working. And it will just, I really believe that the big what's holding it up is how to get this systemic message out, because it's very threatening to the corporate media, the corporate systems that are now entrenched in universities. So we have to be creative and going beyond the blocks that come from essentially a corporate colonization of almost every avenue of knowledge. But keep in mind that we already have evidence of these millions of people who are trying to bring about change, whether it's the climate activists, whether it's the people still working to end poverty, concern about the injustice between first world and third world, concerned about the depression, the anxiety, the epidemics of real social malaise and addiction and trauma. I mean, trauma is a word that is just, on everybody's lips these days in the industrialized world, because people are suffering so much. So is a huge amount of activism. There are hundreds of millions of people. I mean, right now we're working with farming organizations representing many hundreds of millions of farmers. We're trying to raise awareness about the need to go towards the more localized, diversified model of food security, the right to feed your own community and region first before you're imposed and forced into these trade treaties that condemn you to producing larger and larger monocultures, or you don't survive. So keep in mind that for movement building, if we could think in terms of addressing these activist groups to show that all of us have something to gain by linking hands with systemic change. I hope that helps, but I hope it makes sense.
I'd also just quickly add, Helena, that I think with in many ways, the direction we're going in as a planet is that we're almost going to be forced into localism in a lot of ways. So a lot of people, I think, that are in the know, it's about preparing and getting things ready because, as I said before, we've seen the fragility of the system in COVID and how supply chains were hugely affected by this particular shock and how that affected crops and supplies of medicines and food and all sorts of things. And we've got a tease with the Arab Spring as well, and we saw those crop failures and how it led to that huge migration and refugees and the geopolitical instability that's on our horizon, that there are going to be crop failures in very popular places in the coming decade. And so we're going to be forced into a sense of food sovereignty in the same way that our energy and our manufacturing during COVID, but we're going to end up in a localized form in some way anyway. People are going to realize they need their own water supply and their own energy and their own food and networks, that this complex global system is just not built for what we have to face moving forward. So in a strange way, I sort of encourage people to sort of be optimistic about that and to make sure that you're preparing people for that and letting them know that this is actually a really viable solution for what we're going to have to face. So why not get ready now? People understand it. They get the language because of COVID. It's suddenly opened up that concept to them. So we need to start growing our own food and making sure we've got decentralized renewable energy. All that's happened recently. So I think that it's important to know that we're going to be forced into this whether we like it or not. And we may as well begin the process right now and get our own community in order and start talking about this in a very meaningful way.
Ella, do you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally for me, politics is so intrinsically tied into culture and what we value as a culture. And I think until we start to flip our culture and our belief system on its head and start really valuing the things that Satish and Damon and Helena have been talking about with localization, we won't see that happening. I have always been taught that it's never going to happen at the top. We have to work on a grassroots level to make change occur at the top. That is what Aboriginal people have been doing since time immemorial, since the invasion of this country. Grassroots, it gets the numbers, and that's how we change the political powers. And it starts first with us reclaiming what kind of world we want for our children and what kind of beliefs we want them to have about valuing a piece of material that's worth $500 over knowing how to grow their own food. And that's something I think we need to address as a culture.
Satish, do you want to also say something about movement building?
I would only very briefly, you have given a very good answer. All three answers are very good. Any big change does not start in the center or does not start by the government. All big changes start at the grassroots level and people lead the change. So Martin Luther King did not start from the White House. And Mahatma Gandhi did not start from New Delhi. They started from, at a grassroots level, ordinary people making the movement. And then it grows bigger, like a great river. A great river does not start from from a big place. A great river starts from a very small hill somewhere, a spring. And that spring, more people join, more tributaries join, more streams join, and then it becomes a big river. So do not expect government to lead the localization. Do not expect government to be the ecologically and spiritually minded leaders. Do not expect Boris Johnson or Modi or anybody, Biden, to lead the localization movement. Localization movement has to be led by people, from us. We have to be the leaders. We have to be a Mahatma Gandhi. We have to be a Martin Luther King. We have to be a Nelson Mandela. We have to be, and Helena, you are that. And Vandana Shiva is that. So when many people have changed their way of life and started to grow their own food and started to make their own clothes and started to have a local economy, and as global economy is very, very fragile, very vulnerable. So local economy is strong. So when many masses of people join this movement, then it will become a big movement. Then media will come back and the government will legalize it and they will support it. But don't expect government to lead the localization movement. It has to be led by people, and people have to take away their support, not buy anything made globally, and not support any global economy. The moment majority of people, large numbers of people withdraw their support, non-cooperation, that was Mahatma Gandhi's way. When people non-cooperate with the economic system, this economic system is a house of cards. It will fall apart. And so it's we people who are holding this up. And so we have to address ourselves and say, we are not going to support it. So let's build a people's movement at a grassroots level all over the world, as you said, small local economy on a global scale. If we can do that, then I think governments and media and the political power, they will come back and they will follow us.
Thank you.
Excellent. On that note, you know, as the film referenced, the global economy has so tied us into dependence. That's been one of its main strategies. And this questioner gets at that. Raki, or maybe she, I'm sorry, asks, we are being killed by the convenience and cheap price / subsidy of mass production. Global economy. Whenever we try to go local, it is exhausting and expensive and still a privilege for the middle class itself. How can we make local more affordable? Beyond gift sharing and bartering economies, some insights from you experts, especially Satish Kumar sir, will be very helpful.
How to make local economy more affordable is a very good question. First of all, the cost of global economy, we measure only in terms of money. But we have to think the cost of global economy in terms of cost to the environment, cost to the community, cost to our spirit, cost to our imagination and creativity and our skills. Globalization is destroying our skills. We are becoming de-skilled. People can only do with their hands, use computers and use iPhone and so on. They can't build a house. They can't make clothes, they can't grow food, they don't know how to plant a seed. And so that's a great cost, that's a great expense. So we are only thinking in terms of money. And also we have to learn to pay just price for our food. We have become too used to people making things in Bangladesh or in Vietnam or China, cheap labor, slave labor, and sending us those clothes and selling in supermarkets in Sydney or in Paris or in London or in New York, they're very cheap. I think that's unjust order. So seeking this cheap food, cheap clothes, and cheap everything is a mistake. Money is only an idea. Money is only a credit card, only a figure on the computer. What is the real cost of globalization? That's a cost to the environment, cost to our skills, cost to our imagination, good life, neighborhood. If we count all those costs, I think globalization and global economy is very costly, very expensive. We cannot afford globalization. Only thing we can afford is localization. So pay with your money just price and barter things and also grow your own. I grow this summer, since May, I have not bought a single penny's worth of vegetables and fruit. My raspberries, strawberries, gooseberries, apples, everything coming from my garden. And I have not bought any. So why not make our own? Everybody should participate in growing food. Everybody should have a garden. Every school should have a garden. Every university should have a garden. Schumacher College has a garden, 7 acres. And we produced 30,000 pounds worth of vegetables last year. So I think this idea that we should get cheap food and just we don't have to do anything, we can just sit and watch television or surf computers and just fiddle with our iPhones and smartphones, and everything should be provided to us cheaply. That's a wrong idea. We have to participate in making things. Spend less time on your computers, spend less time on your emails, and spend more time in the garden and making something beautiful. Then it will be cheaper.
And just to add to that too, I think forming relationships with your community will allow you to see value in the crafts that people are making, and you'll actually be able to spend less money but give to those people that you love for the better of their lives as well. So again, like a fundamental key is developing and building those relationships within your community, with your neighbors. And a practical example of something that you can do right now is what I'm doing is creating a jar club, and it's you come together monthly, you exchange and swap a bunch of jarred goods, which are mostly from my garden or from other people's gardens, pestos or sauerkrauts or things like that. And it's free. You just exchange them with your friends. You know, we can think outside of these economic binaries that keep us thinking that we're in scarcity, but there is so much abundance. Life is teeming outside of this computer and the walls that we live in, waiting for us to interact with it. And we're consuming dead things instead of that. So, you know, I think thinking beyond this idea that we're going to end up, if we're local, like either incredibly impoverished or we won't have enough is just simply not true. I mean, I'm a relatively full-time activist, which means I'm broke, and I live by local. I value the food I put on my plate, so that is where most of my money goes. And I live in a share house with 5 women, so I pay cheap rent. But I do not spend any money on fashion whatsoever, and I haven't for over 5 years, and I have plenty of money.
Very good, very good. Very good.
Damon, did you want to comment on that too?
Not really. I just, yeah, I agree with what Ella said. And it's so, I just find it so overwhelming sometimes because of the complexity and the largeness of this system and how we get people, because we, on this call, we understand it, and we do know, we've experienced ourselves, many of us, when we have gone outside and disconnected with nature. But you know, 99.9% of the world aren't in that space, and they are addicted, and they've been engineered to be addicted to, whether it's food or it's the internet or it's opiates or it's alcohol, whatever it might be. So our challenge is meeting those people where they're at and finding ways of cutting through and communicating and offering something magical that we've all experienced when we do put all those things down and we simplify. We know that, but our challenge is what we're up against, you know. And so that's why I think the story element is so important, and artists and musicians and filmmakers in this moment are just so crucial, because we have to change the narrative. We have to change the metaphors of our collective story, because there's no meaning right now. People are lost. And the reason they're addicted to their devices is because they think there's nothing else. We've sort of bought into this market economy, enlightened scientific perspective, and it's just devoid of anything, or the spirit and the care that we want. So from my perspective, there could be nothing more meaningful than the regeneration of our communities and the landscape and the earth. Like, that is the work, I feel, for the rest of our lives, all of us, for the centuries ahead. But we've just got to get that through to people and teach them the magic that's under the trees and in the soil, and what happens to a community when they come together and create action. It is magic, and we need to sell that and live it and show it, so that people can see that and go, wow, that's different to Netflix, or that's different to that feeling. I want to do what they're doing. We've got to lead by example, and we can't preach. We can't be didactic about it. We've got to live it and radiate it. And those that know have to now more than ever shine their light and entice people to follow and come to that light. So there's work to be done, but I love what Ella said. Even her saying that made me feel that, and saying, yes, the simplicity and the joy in that simplicity. We're all craving it because we're so full. And yet just putting your hands in the soil is exactly what the earth wants us to do, what the earth needs us to do, and it's exactly what we need to do for ourselves.
Very good.
I would like also to remind us that it's not 99% of humanity, because such a large proportion of people in the so-called third world are actually still living much closer to the land. And
sure, it was a turn of phrase.
Yeah.
I didn't mean exactly.
Yeah, but I think that helps. I think it helps to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But then for us, the issue forever has been that they are being subjected to media images that tell them that they're inferior and backward. So it's not so much that they're addicted to the screen or that they've been robbed of all their skill and robbed of their communities, but they're being robbed of their self-respect. And I think that is where this more complicated side comes in. It's not enough to lead by example by going out there in our gardens, in our places. There is this need for the filmmaking, for the storytelling, you know, the kind of stuff that Damon's trying to do and that we're also trying to do. We're trying to share the story on the screen that tells exactly the opposite story of what the screen is telling people now. So in places like Ladakh and Bhutan, you know, where I've worked, the screen is there romanticizing the urban consumer culture. And, you know, if you're not part of that, you're nobody. There isn't the vision of all these people in the West who are actually starting to farm and who love farming and who are longing for community. So just there between global North and global South, there's a great need for that communication, which isn't enough to stay in our gardens. We need to come together and actually use these screens, particularly, I think, through film. I don't know that social media can help very much, but at least sharing through film and storytelling on the screen and over distance. So getting the message out globally that there is this worldwide localization movement is vitally important, particularly in the third world, but even in the West. I find that very often people have no idea how much is going on in their own area. It's remarkable how much is happening that's really positive, and that's a really clear example of what makes people healthier and happier. And so that, how do we make that more visible? That's part of what I think the complexity of the story is.
Helena, thank you very much for letting me be part of this discussion. I have to go now, but it's very good discussion going on, and wish you every success with all the work you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Satish.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Can I just add one thing also? I think, you know, a lot of what people aren't talking about in this story is the hope that Mother Nature is an unknown, powerful force, and that if you just go and spend a little bit of time in nature, you can understand the resilience of plants. I mean, I'm just looking at my house plants now, and they're resilient, you know, like I can leave them and they look a bit weathered, but when I come back and give them attention, they come back to life. And we are living in an environment that wants to live. You know, nature wants to live. What people aren't talking about in the climate crisis is the unknown of Mother Nature. And that is, again, because we're stuck in a spiritual crisis.
Yeah, very good point. In other words, the infinite complexity, the infinite intelligence, and, you know, something way beyond what human minds are able to get their heads around. We're talking about something that goes way beyond our knowledge. So there's a hubris in science that proclaims, you know, that, you know, we only have so many more years, and this is happening. for sure, we can see that fossil fuels have been a disaster on so many counts. We can see the toxicity of the fumes, the pesticides, for 1,000,001 reasons we need to cut down. But we don't have to buy into a narrative that tells us it's soon all over. As you're saying, there is this intelligence, complexity that goes way beyond us being ever able to be certain that we know what Mother Gaia is going to do. And it's wonderful to know that both human bodies, everything that lives, has this urge to balance towards health, towards healing. And whether in medicine or agriculture, we have a fear-based narrative that tells us it's only through our intervention that we know how to heal and that we know what to do.
So there are so many questions around around technology and corporations and some of these hard, sticky issues. So even though you guys answered this together so well this morning, I'm going to have to ask you to do it again. Some of the questions are from Moray. Many of the solutions to the climate crisis are technological, e.g. electric cars, solar panels, electrolyzers. These solutions can only really be developed by large corporations. While I agree some food production and clothing manufacture can be local, small-scale local production cannot perform the necessary R&D to develop and efficiently manufacture cars, efficient heating systems, solar panels, and batteries. What role do you think large corporations have in developing such technology? There's also a similar one on the same note from Georgina. How do we, as members of the localization movement, grapple with realities like corporations making changes or being able to make changes before national governments do, consumer demand, market shifts, how much power do they have, maybe more than policy making? How do we ensure to include corporations at the table rather than view them in a negative light automatically? So a lot of stuff there for you guys to go at. I do wish you luck.
I'll just quickly start on the renewable energy one, because there are some really pertinent examples of it not being up to corporations or large scale production. So people should have a look at the Indi community in Australia, who Helen Haynes and Cathy McGowan before her just got together and realised that their representative wasn't representing them, and did some kitchen table conversations and worked out what they really cared about, and then put forward these candidates that have really changed the landscape in their region. And they also decided that they wanted clean energy, but they didn't want a top-down solution. And this is really interesting because we're right at a pivot right now where we could go either way, where we might have, like the fossil fuel industry, which has a monopoly on the energy. We could do that with renewables, but there is also this other pathway that is sort of emerging of being far more decentralized. So what this community did was actually build their own battery and community setup, but they had 260,000 investors and owners in that system, so that it wasn't just one corporation. They split and became a co-op within their community so they could all own that energy. And there is technology, there's websites that allow that to happen right now, and they'll do the governance for you and have all these individual owners. What that's led to, and again, this should be hopeful in terms of how we can change our democracy and how that can ripple upwards, is that Helen Haynes has now taken to the Parliament in Australia a clause that says that any new solar farm or wind turbine that's built should have 30% community ownership at a minimum. So this is what happens when we can elect someone that truly represents our values, that we want to do some things differently. There is a door ajar here. There is the possibility of doing things very differently. And that's just an example from Australia. I know that's starting to happen in other places around the world. So we don't have to rely on it. We don't have to surrender and just accept that this system is what it is. We are told every day that we're consumers, and it's nonsense. We are citizens. And that should be our greatest strength in empowerment in this moment, is who is representing you? Find out who it is and are they actually representing your values, and look at all these other communities and these voices of movement that have changed their democracy in their region and have elected people that do represent what their values want and aren't now asking for regulations and changes to the corporate structure. You look at Ireland, who only 5 years ago had a completely polluted democracy. They got together and said, we want no more political donations. And they've banned it now. So it's now a publicly funded election each year. That happened in 5 years because people came together and said, we're not happy about this. So we've been told we're consumers. That's very easy. It suppresses us. It feels like we're hopeless and we've got nothing we can do. But now is the time to find our agency and realize we have enormous agency. And there are people willing to create this change. And if we just start, we can get some momentum. And like Satish was saying, throughout history, this change has never been linear. The suffragettes, the human rights movement, the abolitionists, there was a build-up of momentum, and then there was a tipping point and the floodgates open, like Rosa Parks on the bus. That wasn't about Rosa Parks in that moment. It was all the work that had gone on before her, and then it happened. So we've just got to keep moving forward and keep marching, and just know that that day when the floodgates open may well happen, you know, and it might happen because of climate forcing it. It might happen because of some other pandemic or some kind of shock we have. But if enough of us are laying the groundwork, getting the solutions out there, letting people know that these things are possible, when these things do happen, we'll get influxes of numbers, which is exactly what's happening in our country right now. And all these regions that are fed up with our politics, they are starting their own movements and not their government, because the same thing happened there. So it doesn't have to be the way we think it is, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Ella.
Yeah, I struggle to believe that under this capitalist consumerist system, the corporations are going to have the answer. I really think what has driven us to this situation right now is things that are man-made and not things that are nature-made. I urge people to look into hemp batteries rather than lithium batteries. In my research, lithium is not sustainable. It's not, it's mined. It's going to use a lot of copper. It's going to use the grid to be plugged in. I think we need to be wary of what being sold in terms of continuing our culture and society in the expanding growth system that we're trying to do by just replacing renewable energy on top of an already unsustainable energy system. The reality is the system is broken. It's unsustainable. So we need to change, and we need to be okay with the fact that life may look a little bit different for all of us. There are sacrifices that all of our ancestors made for us to be able to live on this beautiful planet. And it's now time for us to take the convenience away and stop living in this space of just expecting things to appear to us. I really believe the solutions are in things like mycelium, which is seen all around the world doing incredible things for our waterways with the agricultural runoff, with oil spills. Just in terms of general health, eating them. We all know mushrooms can be eaten and can be incredible sources of medicine. Plants, I mean, Damon talks about in 2040 that seaweed is the fastest growing plant that we have to extract carbon. I mean, plants naturally extract carbon. They are our green solution. And while I understand that the renewables is a band-aid for something, I do think that we need to be looking to nature to solve these problems and not corporations. That's just how I fundamentally believe we have to go. We can't continue in a society where everything is hard and fast. We have done that too much. Resources are finite, and it's time to slow down. And that's really what this movement is about. You know, like maybe we will not be able to travel in airplanes. Maybe we have to return to sailing. You know, maybe there are other options for us in terms of travel, which looks like urban landscapes, remove car usership, and we bring in, if we did want big buses or so forth that were running on these hemp batteries that only, you know, need to have one charge a day and can transport hundreds of people across cities. Like we have to remove this idea of this individual ownership as well as we move into the new paradigm, because that's what community is about. It's about sharing, it's about transforming, and we will be rewarded with so much more. I honestly believe that the reason the world looks the way it is because of how severely disconnected we are, that we're looking everywhere for answers, our phones, travel, the next holiday. We're an unhappy culture of people, and that's because we're disconnected from source and each other, and therefore we're disconnected from our truth. So to find our way back to that, we have to work with our community, with our immediate family, with ourselves on how we can get connected so that we can see a future that is alternative to the one that is being fed to us in mainstream media.
Damon, do you want to comment on that?
I just totally agree. I think that, yeah, I guess it's that my work the last 6 years is seeing that actually the way to fix is the wrong word, but the way to heal our climate problem is to regenerate the planet, all our ecosystems. You know, we talk about these giant carbon sucking machines from this reductionist mindset that can take out 4,000 tons of carbon a year. Well, a forest takes out 9.6 billion tons of carbon in a year. So nature's got all the answers. Mangroves sequester 4 times what a forest does. Saltlands, you know, peatlands, all these things, if we restore them and bring back biodiversity, we get a beautiful functioning planet. We get healthier soils. We fix the water cycle. We improve our own health in the food. Like, the opportunity is just waiting for us. And we're still thinking, no, we've just got to go down this path and this reductionist mindset, and we can control everything. And nature's just quietly there, like you said, Ella, outside our windows right now, away from these screens, just going, come on, like, when are you going to notice me? Because I've got all your answers. Stop trying to fix it from this mind space, just lower. So I totally agree with Ella, right? And I think that's why my work is trying to amplify that and say this moment is an opportunity to change and fundamentally change how we interact with each other and our communities in the living world, because we can't keep doing what we're doing. So it's a gift, really. You know, climate change, all this systemic breakdown, COVID, if we actually see it for what it is, it's a terrific opportunity to start localizing and change our practices. Otherwise, you know, it's a suicide mission. We all know it. Even people that don't really know it. You know, even CEOs and corporations know it. They just don't know what the alternative looks like. And that's why we've got to share it. And we've got to tell our stories and give them comfort and get them excited by it. That life can be better on the other side of this crisis, fundamentally better. Jobs with meaning, healthy food, strong connections. It's all there. Let's move from an industrial civilization to an ecological civilization in the next 100 years. What a privilege, what a time to be alive. Imagine historians 300 years from now going, imagine being alive in 2021 when an entire species started to transform the way they live. What a gift to be alive there. Well, that's us right now in that moment. So celebrate that you're alive in this moment and make the most of it.
I would also like, I've got many of my colleagues in the West talk about the shift to an ecological civilization. And I just want to make a plea for keeping in mind that need for diversity and think in terms instead of ecological cultures. So one of the main points about localization is that adaptation to diversity and moving in the direction of smaller scale units. And so that we, I think it's quite an important distinction. From within the West, maybe not, but it's just that it is that multiple, you know, the sort of multipolar goal, that real respect for diversity. So I think multitude of ecological cultures collaborating so that we're not talking about, you know, as earlier we had a discussion about this problem of thinking that we can just retreat into our local diverse thing when we know that we've got these global problems. So how do we collaborate internationally to allow for that shift, to support genuine diversity? And that's where we could, I suppose, be talking about the whole human race coming to this agreement that we're all going to be living in an ecological way. But I think still that multitude is good to keep in mind. Ella, did you want to say something too?
No, I just love you both and the work that you do, and your tireless endeavors to find the truth. So I feel really privileged to be here with both of you today.
Straight back at you, Ella.
And I think also that all three of us recognize that it's not about the truth, but it's about this coming back to the humility of living within the reality of complexity and constant change. This incredible, rich, moving reality that is the living world, and that it's part of the hubris of Western civilization has been the belief that we know the truth and that we're pinning it all down into this is how it is, this is how it works. So
but I think the soil is the truth, Helena. I think the soil is the truth. And when we seek for all these ephemeral gods and beliefs, you just pick up a handful of soil and there's 8 billion microbes in it of all sorts of extraordinary function and life. To me, that's the truth. That's the most truthful thing we have right now anywhere in the world, is go and stick your hands in the soil.
Yeah, but if you think that you've known every one of those microbes and what they're about, then it's not the truth.
Absolutely. No, we know 5% of them. 5% of them, we know.
Yeah. Sorry?
We only know 5% of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
I would argue the Western world may know 5% of them. I'm sure that sure that there are indigenous people around the world that have far more complexities, and that's something that we need to also remember when looking at science, is that science is really just so far behind in terms of what indigenous wisdom has to offer us for understanding the knowledge systems in place.
Yeah, I think we'll be heading now towards wrapping things up, unless there are any
more mind-bending questions, Henry, for us to kind of grapple over.
No, I wasn't going to throw one of those at you again, Damon, not at 9:03 p.m. on a Thursday evening. But there is a really nice question. I think it referred specifically to Satish because of his way of presenting, but it definitely refers to all of you. And it's from Haley. My question is about the enthusiasm I have just witnessed, which is incredible. How, after pushing this message for so long without seeing huge change, do you remain inspired?
Great question.
Well, in my case, I have been doing it longer than you two. In my case, what keeps me inspired is the amazing, wonderful people I'm in touch with. I mean, I'm also, I can oversell this whole localization malarkey because I just see people who have joined that direction towards nature, towards awakening to that richness, to that constant miracle of life that is every moment that you live different, every moment unique. Once you slow down to comprehend that, just the magic even of the muscles in your hand, the mountains, the light, the constant life around you, once you realize how dead and simplistic and predictable this man-made entertainment is, how deadly it is to be made to feel that you're inferior if you don't belong to this successful, urban, competitive rat race. Once you wake up to that, it just creates people of well-being, a joy, a deeper self-respect, a sense of greater empowerment, and of course, much greater community. So I just see, I'm so enlivened and so inspired by having been connected to movements on every continent. And every time I'm in touch, particularly with those young people who are, as Damon was saying, you know, holding a piece of soil in their hands and who have learned enough about that to engage with it in a productive way, it is just so so inspiring, so enlivening, and constantly affirming my conviction that we need to do everything we can to allow more people to see this and to wake up. Basically, it's about waking up, getting out of this almost trance-like slumber of following, what we were taught at school, about what we were taught was real, what we were taught was important, all the time subjugating ourselves to an idea of who we should be, not allowing ourselves to be ourselves. Part of this whole system operates by making us feel inferior, making us feel imperfect, and we're all the time looking up to completely unreal role models. And often those role models are people we know, but we don't know them because they're hiding behind walls in the nuclear family. But to the outside world, we have to appear so much more perfect, so much more in control, so much more powerful. So one of the keys in the localization movement is coming together locally to be vulnerable, to be real, to be able to expose your own flaws, your own fears, your own anxieties, and learning that we all have them, that we're all imperfect. And as you start becoming part of real community and real face-to-face interaction, you're just happier and lighter. And so I'm absolutely inspired by all those people who are doing that. And that there are so many more people than you could imagine. I'm learning all the time about more of these initiatives, and almost always it's a we. It's people who come together to do things.
Yeah. Ella, do you want to say any final words?
Well, I mean, I guess ask the question back to Haley, like, how do you say so enthusiastic about having a relationship with your mother? I use mother because sometimes we have problems with our mothers. I see this movement as intrinsically linked to my relationship with my birth mother and the mother nature. And my enthusiasm doesn't come, I guess it's, no amount of friction from either mothers is going to stop me from having a relationship with them. No amount of challenges of not being able to understand each other is going to prevent me from showing up for either of those mothers in my life. I am determined to spend every day making a choice when I wake up. How do I connect? How am I going to make choices that bring me closer to connection? And how the hell am I going to be an elder that people respect and want to listen to? Because that's what I think. We are all elders in training. We all have ancestral lines back to that one connected person in our ancestral line before they got affected by this system. We all have our indigenous roots somewhere on this planet that is embedded in caring from nature. And that's where I find my joy in doing this work, is because I love those mothers. I love you. I love my ancestors, and I love my unborn children, and hope to see a future for Damon's children, for my unborn children, and for the children to come, because this is the truth of why we live here together, to be able to create beautiful things inherently linked with nature, to remember the magic, and to be able to pass that on to those who are not yet here.
Thank you. Damon, do you want to say some last words?
Not really. You both just said it so eloquently. I guess maybe just to be aware of, I'm very aware of the content that I digest in the same way of the foods we eat. I try and consume the content that does fill me up each day. And when you do swim and dance in that space, as you alluded to, Helena, it's extraordinary how much is going on around the world right now in so many fields. So what gives me hope is watching, a conservative farmer in his 80s walk around his land with an indigenous elder and talk about regenerating the landscape, or learning what the language of that land is and what song needs to be sung on that land. A conservative Australian farmer is doing that as we speak. or just the extraordinary passion of these young kids, or even some of the CEOs I speak to, they're like, oh, well, what do we do? But we've got to do it. Like, we are on the precipice of a fundamental change as a species. And like I said, we're around for that. Like, that should get everyone springing out of bed in the morning, because there's work to do, but there's legitimate muscular hope. It's not a fantasy. There is legitimate, exciting things happening around the world when you look for them. And we don't get them in the mainstream. We all know that. We know why, but you got to look for them. And when you do, you can't help but be filled up. So search for those and digest nutritious content is what I'd say.
And remember that, just look at young children. Are they made to consume plastic gadgets? What are these little beings about? First of all, they're all born with a great need for love and care. They need that. The consumerism has intervened with that need to tell them that if they want to be loved, they've got to have the latest gadgets. So we must all change that narrative. And when we do it, we're actually talking about the power of who we are, what we are made of as human beings, and what the rest of creation is made of. Ultimately, life will win. Life will win without a doubt. We're talking about man-made structures that are not going to live forever. This journey of genuine evolution, which requires diversity, is life. The man-made system is imposing monoculture. It's a dead end. It's deadly. So let's support life and wake up to it right now and feel the joy of it. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Damon and Ella.
Thank you,
Henry,
everyone.
your help,
Everyone for listening.
and all the participants.
Great
Yeah.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. Thanks, Helena.
Everyone.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry.
No
Bye.
worries. Thank you all. And for those who have just come across Local Futures, follow us at Local Futures. Our website is localfutures.org. Damon and Ella have also been featured in our stuff as well, so you can find them through us. Thanks so much for spending this time tonight, or this morning, depending on where you are. And especially to the panelists for doing it twice today. Very good job.
You too, Henry. Twice.
See you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.